I'm going to introduce you to tonight's speakers. I am not going to do the boring academic resume introduction because that will spoil the whole story. They are going to tell you their story now. You can see there's a professor on the screen, and he's not even the clever one of the two. I think what's really special about these two people is that Professor John Cooper embodies the word a scholar and a gentleman. And then there's Margaret, who is, you know, I never thought that you can combine grace with the legal fraternity as much as she does. But she embodies that word grace and a very, very, very sharp intelligence and perceptiveness. And together they crafted a career. And what we're bringing you tonight is essentially actually a love story. It's almost like a forever after story. But it's not just their story, it is also their story with Africa and their story with nature. And so with that, I am going to stop sharing and hand the screen over to them.
Thank you very much for those, as always, very kind words. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. It's a delight to present this today. And quite apart from presenting it, it's wonderful to see so many names on the screen from people from our past. They go right back to our dear friend Hafida Mohammed, who was actually one of my students in Tanzania in the 60s. She hasn't aged a bit. Hujambo, Hafida, we welcome you as always. Karibu sana. But it's really nice to have so many people here. You've seen the title there. I want to say, to introduce ourselves, bottom two pictures here, we are a bit like African chameleons, that's the Coopers. We have different guises. We have a guise on the bottom left there. This is our sort of camouflage here in Britain for conferences and academic dues. And then we have the one on the bottom right there with colleagues on one of our workshops in Africa, in Kenya. And that's really where we're much happier. And of course, that's the main theme of our talk today. Right.
We describe ourselves as a husband and wife team, an animal lawyer and a veterinary pathologist. But we have to admit that we're never happier than when we're driving through East Africa on top of a four-wheel drive vehicle. Our family and friends are beginning to say we ought to be tucked up, cosy, in our cottage in England and not being venturesome. But on the other hand, even when we're in England, we can't resist the sight of a Land Rover, although we have just recently decided we let the younger generation get onto the rooftop.
But do note the back cloth is still the Rifali in East Africa, so it's always there regardless. Well, that's at the background there. Margaret will tell you about our migrations.
Yes. We have been lucky to travel quite widely around the world anyway, but we're very mindful of this quotation at the bottom of the slide. Living abroad is a very different thing from traveling abroad. And we have been fortunate to live in a number of different areas of the world, in the top row in Arabia and in Europe and in the West Indies. But we have to admit that a very large chunk of our hearts lie with East Africa, and from the savannas and the dry areas right through to the high peaks of the Virunga Mountains in Rwanda.
Well, that's our migrations summarized. You'll hear more later. What about our own personal journey? Well, we met top left at university in the 1960s in Bristol. We had shared interests in animals, in conservation, in human rights and in various issues. As you can see in the top picture there, Margaret doesn't seem too taken by my African rock python, which was one of many animals I kept. And she had good cause to be concerned, because if you move to the right, move your eyes to the right, you'll see a year later it decided to bite me in the eye, and I was in hospital for a week and became something of a celebrity. So that was quite a good start. But bottom left, we didn't only have those sort of animals that we looked after, shared, rescued, whatever it was. We had others as well. Look, bottom left there, look at that beautiful tawny owl. Isn't it pretty? Oh, and behind it, do you see the pretty girl there? That's Margaret Vowles. And would you believe it? I married her. And then the middle picture, bottom row there, is of our marriage. That was in 1969. It was in a small 13th century English church, and the address was done by a missionary from Tanzania, all very, very appropriate. So that's the background there. And once we were married, we embarked upon our first joint migration. Look at the map on the right, which is the paths of migrating birds from Europe to Africa. And we pretty well took the path far right there, going down to the Rift Valley. But in fact, I'm cheating a little bit here because I had already been in Tanzania for a year before we got married. Now, working in Africa in the 60s made us something of a new world. And I'll tell you the reason why. Because on 3rd of February 1960 in Cape Town, South Africa, in a speech to members of Parliament in the South African Houses of Parliament, British Prime Minister Harold Macmillan spoke of the wind of change. Look at the title of our lecture, blowing through the continent of Africa, as more and more majority black populations in British colonies demanded the right to rule themselves. Harold Macmillan said, whether we like it or not, this growth of national consciousness is a political fact. And we, the Coopers, were part of that wind of change as countries became independent. Examples, the ones we've lived and worked in: Tanganyika, independence in 1961, Uganda 1962, Kenya 1963. And this next bit is important. And hundreds of young Brits offered to work in and assist those in the so-called developing African countries. My contribution was here. I was one of those Brits who volunteered. I went out as the first veterinary surgeon with a voluntary service overseas. And these are just a few pictures. Because of time, we must move on fairly quickly. But we were involved in training of students, and I think Hafida is in that picture, top left somewhere, training of young Tanzanians, working with livestock, of course, and also wildlife, which is very relevant to the presentation today. I returned to Britain. Margaret was still doing her law exams to become a solicitor, as we call them here. I went to Edinburgh to do postgraduate studies, and then, as you saw, we got married in 1969. And then in 1969, having just got married, we went to Kenya. We went to be based at the government veterinary laboratories, top left there, a historical and very important building. It is the second oldest veterinary laboratory in Africa, other than the one in Onderstepoort. And the vet lab was, and still is, only a stone's throw from the Faculty of Veterinary Medicine, the picture you can see to the right of it. Now, most of my work, as you can imagine, as a veterinary research officer, was with domesticated stock, and you can see some in there. But we were very lucky at that time that we were invited to become involved with other wildlife projects. Second row down, second picture over there, a young John Cooper and a fellow Mzungu, European Brit, another volunteer, at Dr. Lewis Leakey's Primate Centre, which we'll refer to later. Dr. Lewis Leakey, the famous paleontologist, said, would I be his honorary vet? And of course, if Lewis Leakey asked you, you said yes. And then on the right, you can see his son, Jonathan Leakey, who heard about this and said, well, couldn't John Cooper and his wife come up and look at my snakes that are dying up at my snake farm in Baringo? And that's what we're doing there. I was already, the last picture, middle row on the right there, I was already the very honorary veterinary surgeon to the Nairobi Snake Park. And we put in that picture because that was the first python I post-mortemed, African python. It actually had come from State House and had been delivered metaphorically by President Jomo Kenyatta. It had been found dead there. Now, that's a picture in itself, of course, but you could be excused for saying, oh, no one else was there except dear Margaret. You can see her shadow on the right there, who's taking the photo. The truth is 20 or 30 people were watching this. Local Kenyans, mainly African, that is black Kenyans, and they were inside buildings, peering through the glass, hiding around the corners, etc., because they were terrified of what I was doing. It might have been a dead snake, but nevertheless, they didn't like it. And then bottom row, we were very much involved with such things as rehabilitation of wildlife, especially birds of prey. And I'll leave Margaret to say something else from there.
Yes, we had a very happy family life in Kenya. And but would like to show you particularly the picture bottom right of the christening of one of our children. It indicates the transitions that were going on at that time. That in the framework of the picture, you can see the stones of an old settlers' church built by the people who came to open up the country. But in actual fact, the actual christening was carried out by a very modern Kenyan from the Maasai group.
What happened then was that we decided we must stay in Britain and have a few years for our children to grow up. We must remind you, and it will come as a surprise to some of our African friends of all races, that we essentially consider ourselves Brits, British people who like to go to Africa, like to go to other countries, and we like to assist. But we thought it was important, as we were part of the aid generation, that our children should grow up here in Britain and go to school here, have their education. And that they did. But I have to say, the moment our second child arrived at university in Southampton, we were on the plane going back to East Africa. This time it was to teach at the Faculty of Veterinary Medicine, as you can see, at Morogoro in Tanzania. Again, because of time, and I'll say at this stage, Margaret, who coordinates this, sounds and looks lovely, but she is a real tyrant if you overrun on your presentations. So I'm developing muscle fasciculations already and will cut down on what I say. So that was Tanzania, lots of exciting things. But pause, that was another aid job. It was funded by Danida, the Danish aid. And after 2 years, they said, you've done your bit. We've trained Tanzanians. Now you must go. Horror of horrors, we might have had to come back to Britain. But in fact, we had a wonderful, unexpected, exciting opportunity. And that was essentially to drive across Tanzania in our Land Rover, we had one in those days, to the Central African country of Rwanda. So we went to Rwanda together, where to a place called the Centre Vétérinaire des Volcans, Mountain Gorilla Veterinary Centre, now Gorilla Doctors, but not up in the mountains as it was then. And there at the foot of the mountains, we ran a little house and a laboratory and so on for the health of the gorillas and other wildlife. We had no electricity until we got a generator, no running water. We collected it with the local people, but it was bliss. And we could go up and see the mountain gorillas any day, whenever we wanted, because I was le vétérinaire, the veterinary officer. And you can see the second picture along, you can see a picture taken very soon after we got there in 1993. That's Margaret with 2 mountain gorillas. Margaret, incidentally, is the good-looking one on the right. The mountain gorillas are behind her. So that's the story there. Lots of exciting things, as you're going to hear in a minute. Mainly minimally invasive, non-invasive monitoring of the gorillas and other wildlife, taking of samples, doing postmortems, etc. Occasionally an intervention, and you can see a picture of an anaesthetized young mountain gorilla there. But I think, Margaret, you want to say something?
Yes, thank you. The bottom right picture very much represents the haunting beauty of Rwanda. It's not for nothing. It's called Le Pays de Mille Collines, the land of 1,000 hills. And it's going from those high volcanoes you've already seen right down into these deep valleys of mists and mystery.
However, despite its beauty, something happened to us. In April 1994, we'd only been there 6 months, the Rwanda genocide broke out. Interestingly, in that same month, it was the first free election in South Africa. And we had journalists rushing between South Africa and Rwanda. They didn't know whether they should be reporting the good news from South Africa or the horror of Rwanda. This is a I don't like talking about this in any case, will say no more except to draw your attention to a couple of things. First of all, part of that poem by Ben Okri, particularly the last two lines. They perish, and Africa's hopes perish with them. That was how we all felt at the time. And far right, you can see a group of blue-hatted United Nations troops. They were our peacekeepers, and you can see I'm addressing them there about what we needed help with, etc., etc. The United Nations was berated then. It's been berated today in the Middle East. They are not as if they're not important. But in fact, the blue-hatted UN soldiers from many different countries saved thousands of lives, and we were possibly amongst those. Right. Another little pause just to say we returned to Rwanda after our evacuation, and we went through a number of countries, an adventure in itself. We fulfilled our 2-year contract in Rwanda and then felt, for obvious reasons, we needed a change. And Margaret has mentioned that we lived in Arabia. We were there for about 18 months. We lived in France and we lived in Germany. But then, 1997, we began to reassess our efforts in Africa and indeed in other tropical countries. And we realized that the possibility of getting teaching and other appointments in newly developed African countries was becoming less and less, and rightly so, because we and the hundreds of others who've gone out, not just Brits, had made it our aim to train local people so that they would literally take over the jobs that we were doing. So we decided to make our base in Britain, but because one reason was we've got academic interests here, of course, still have, but we wanted to be able to go to other countries, New Zealand, South America, not as tourists, of course, as Margaret's made clear, but in order to teach and do things there. And we wanted, with that, we wanted to combine that with every year going 2 or 3 times, fairly extensive visits to Africa to continue to contribute in some way. And the way we did contribute and continue to contribute is by teaching and training. The pictures here give you an idea of some of the sort of activities, and you'll be seeing more in a minute when Margaret takes over. Top left, we started at Makerere University, the famous Makerere University in Uganda, and ran courses there, as you can see. And then further on, the third picture, some of you will recognize our friend, colleague, and former student, Dr. Gladys Kalema Zikusoka. We'll call her Dr. Gladys, everyone else does. She was one of our students, etc. And she, of course, has done presentations for LCA, screen share, etc. And at the end there, the right of Gladys, you can see that more recently, we've been doing some training in Rwanda, and mainly with livestock. You can see me with a calf there, etc. But moving down, Kenya Veterinary Board sign, I'm fortunate in that I'm still registered as a veterinary surgeon in Kenya, one of the oldest on the list, of course, but this has opened lots of doors in terms of training, working with animals, domesticated and wildlife, etc., in a way that would not be very easy if we were conventional expatriates or just going out there for a short time. I should say that our courses are run in English and Swahili, sometimes English with a smattering of Swahili because it's an educated group, often when we're in rural areas, the other way round. One of the things that we emphasize on all our courses, whether it's a 1-day course, a 7-day course, whatever, is the importance of field work. And that, of course, is because livestock are found in the field, wildlife are found in the field. This means one often has to improvise. Third picture along, top row rather, that's a PM table that we set up on the edge of Lake Bogoria in the Rift Valley of Kenya, when we were doing quite a long-term study with colleagues there on why the flamingos were dying in the Rift Valley lakes. And far right, you can see a very simple field kit. If you're working in the field, someone, possibly someone helping you, has to carry those things. And second row down here, because Margaret's going to tell you more about workshops, it's just to say that field work can be carried out anywhere, as you can see from 1 or 2 of the pictures, but particularly look at the second one in the second row there. There's Margaret Cooper sitting by the roadside, the trackside in Uganda with our MSc students, and they are examining tortoises that have been very foolishly crossing the road and were then subject to a full examination. Now Margaret's going to say a bit more about our courses, our workshops.
Yes, one of our early workshops in Kenya was on livestock in the community, and we gave lectures in a local classroom and had some poultry handling and examination. And then after a good meal, which is always very important for networking, and then we moved out to our beloved property in just outside Kwale, about Mombasa, and we held our afternoon examination of cattle and goats belonging to local herders who normally herd their cattle across what was our property, and then doing microscope work and examination and so on. That comprised the day, so it was genuine field work, really out in the bush, making do without power and light. But we have done other, in different situations. We've done workshops with the University of Nairobi in the veterinary faculty, and on this occasion it was on forensics, and we had a big audience. I think we catered for 40. We got something like
187, and yet the cooks managed. Try that here in Britain, and they go on strike. Yeah.
No, there's the miracles were worked by the faculty themselves, but we always try to do our work under the auspices of local local people, such as the local veterinarian, official veterinarian in the livestock one, and this one through the faculty. The faculty staff give their lectures, and we bring in other people, such as people from the museums. The gentleman in the red jacket, right in the middle, is getting very excited about maggots and bad meat.
And you'll get more about maggots later,
Yeah.
so
hang on.
Don't switch off. Yeah.
And then on the top left is the head of osteology at the museum, who is very enthusiastic about skulls and forensics. He's an expert. We then also have done one on birds of prey, and this very much illustrates the value we think is of bringing in people from different disciplines and to network and understand. In this case, the veterinary faculty converted their poultry lectures into bird of prey lectures, the different anatomy and so on. This was quite an effort on their part, because as far as they're concerned and their poultry keeping clients are concerned, birds of prey are chicken thieves, or if they're an owl, they're a very bad omen. But also we got invited the head of ornithology at the National Museums of Kenya to talk about the conservation and importance of birds of prey. Then we also had Nature Kenya, who is a natural history organisation, and who brought a lot of literature to illustrate what the conservationists were talking about. Kenya Wildlife Services came, but our star turn was the wildlife rehabilitators, who brought their own birds that they were caring for all to see and to touch.
And I'd just like to add, bottom right picture there, that's a lovely example of multiracial Kenya. We've got there European, white Kenyans, we've got Asian, brown Kenyans, and we've got what we would call African Kenyans, black ones. The colour doesn't matter. They are all wananchi. They are all citizens. Now, I've had an interest all my life in invertebrates. In Swahili, we call them wadudu, sort of creeping creatures, because I'm a naturalist, and because wadudu, invertebrates, are so important in tropical medicine and, of course, in biodiversity. And we've been able to do quite a lot of teaching, sometimes formal courses, relating to them. Perhaps the most exciting, although it was only a one-day course, is depicted in the slides on the left. And this was at a place called Kipepeo on the coast of Kenya. Kipepeo means butterfly or butterflies. No, butterfly in Swahili. And this was a collection, a unit, a farm where, until they were hit by COVID-19, the local people, you can see them beautifully dressed, etc., mainly women, were collecting caterpillars, taking them into the farm. The caterpillars were reared, sometimes on the shamba, the little farm as well. when they became pupae, the pupae were then exported here to Europe, to North America, etc., either for zoos, for butterfly houses, or of course for research. That was wonderful. It was possibly it was a unique day for us, and possibly unique in terms of training in East Africa. On the right, perhaps even more serious in many ways, the question of edible edible invertebrates, and particularly giant snails, Achatina and Archachatina. And you can see there a couple of pictures of our work in Kenya and Tanzania, where we were helping train people in how to raise these, both for local consumption and also in some cases for export to Europe. And bottom right is make the point, we encountered various problems, and I was able, with a Dutch colleague, to investigate a disease of the shells of these Achatina snails, and you can see some very nice radiographs there showing what the sort of things that we were studying. No time for that, like everything else. I've told Margaret, we've told Margaret. You can raise it in the chat if you're still here when the lecture's over.
We also have done workshops on primates in conjunction with the Institute of Primate Research in Kenya. These have followed our usual format, but the lectures are contributed by the Institute. And again, we have use of their facilities and expertise to contribute to it. And from the museum, that table on the right is full of, again, bones from the osteology department and usual enthusiasts.
And may I say, ever since the days of Louis Leakey, who founded the Institute of Primate Research, to today, we have had such wonderful support, even hospitality after our evacuation, from IPR, now Kipri. And Dr. Peter Mwadera, who's the current Director General, I think he's called now, of Kipri. We're most grateful to him, and we're looking forward to seeing him in just a few weeks' time in Kenya. Now, why have we done so many courses, workshops on primates? Well, partly because when we left Rwanda, our interest in gorillas and the people who work with them was not diminished, and we decided to set up the Gorilla Pathology Study Group, GPSG. And we were very lucky, top right there, very fortunate, in that the late, great Professor Philip Tobias from South Africa, from Witwatersrand University, a close friend of Louis Leakey's, agreed to be our patron. Margaret's shown you some pictures in the previous slide, and here are some more of the sort of activities we've done over the years with the GPSG in Africa, mainly Kenya and Uganda. And bottom right is interesting because they also supported a study, quite a long-term study, here in Britain at the Natural History Museum, re-examining or examining essentially the bones, the skeleton of Guy, the famous gorilla that lived at London Zoo for so long, and which many, many people, certainly of our generation, knew so well. So that's on primates. Now, back onto gorilla research. Now, why gorilla research? Well, I've hinted, we don't just teach, we like to engender research projects and do some ourselves. In 2002, a gentleman called Mr. Gordon Hull, he's the fellow with the tie and the white shirt, wrote to us and said, "My name's Gordon Hull. I'm a keen amateur naturalist, very keen on great apes, etc." And he said, "For 30 years, I've been compiling a catalogue of where in the world different specimens can be found, from gorillas, skulls, skins, pickled specimens, etc., etc." And he said, "I'd really like to publish it. Could you, the Coopers, help us?" Well, we were just about to go to Trinidad, as it was, for 7 years, and we had to say, sorry, can't do anything at the moment. But in 2009, when we got back, we met him, and we agreed we'd do our best to help him publish his catalogue. But it sold better, we were told, or would sell better to a publisher if we combined it with a text about the health, the pathology of gorillas generally, rather than just being a catalogue. But as far as Gordon's list is concerned, this was a most superb opportunity during those years, after 2002, to visit various museums, research institutes, zoos, etc., on the continent, in Europe, further afield in Africa, etc., and also local ones. You'll see the Booth Museum of Natural History, lovely red signs there, and that is just a local museum down the road, but from here in Sussex, but they do have gorilla material. So that was very much what we were able to do, and the bottom pictures probably speak for themselves. Did you want to say something about that?
Could I say something about two? Have I got time?
Yeah, I do, yes.
Yes.
Well, I'm not in charge of the timing, but Margaret is in charge of the timing.
Yes.
And I can't see her, yeah.
Well, I was going to say the bottom right, this is our youngest gorilla bones researcher, who's our grandson, Moses. The picture above him still takes my breath away. This, John and the museum, one of the specialists in the museum in Berlin, is holding the skull of the holotype gorilla. This is the first one that was brought back to Europe by von Beringer. And that is not just breathtaking, but I also had a great time with him. I said, where can we find the skin? And he didn't know, I'm not sure where it is. And we went through this cupboard of gorilla skins, and there it was, the actual, the first one described in Europe, and it still had the tag on with von Beringer's name.
And Berlin Museum still has bullet marks in the walls because of the Second World War. So it was all very poignant, but not just poignant, it actually led somewhere. We collated lots of data, as I've said, both macroscopical, like the skulls, and microscopical, but it led to something much more important in the long term, and that was the production of our book. You can see it on the left there. It was published in 2017. It's an enormous tome. Don't rush out and buy it. It's expensive as well, but we are proud of it, and it's got lots of very, very useful data. So that's the book. And would you like to add something?
Again, bottom right, we have 4 of the contributors to the book. You can perhaps recognise Dr. Gladys Kalema there, and also Ian Redmond, who studied parasites with Diane Fossey and is also an elephant expert.
Now, we're just going to pause again here because we want to talk a little bit about our ongoing work in Kenya, so you don't think this is all history. And the first point we want to make is that most of our work over the past 25 years has been self-funded. We are essentially volunteers. We get small grants for our research, but we pay for our flights to Africa, etc. We're not seeking we're certainly not seeking money, and we're not seeking sympathy, but it does mean that we're on a small budget. We have to live modestly, live locally, etc., sometimes literally out in the bush. It also means that we have to think about transport. Now, most respectable lecturers on an LCA seminar, a webinar, have at top left, have a picture of themselves leaning on a 4-wheel drive vehicle, looking wistfully at Africa, and then they start the lecture. Well, we've had Land Rovers and 4-wheel drive vehicles, which sometimes, as in that picture, given the opportunity to use one. Our experience, the second picture there, is that sometimes 4-wheel drive vehicles don't work, particularly the ones that are offered to us. And as you can see, as a former rugby player, I'm much in demand still, I think, for pushing 4-wheel drive vehicles. For some years, we travelled from Nairobi to Mombasa, Margaret will tell you more later, by their buses, things that they call modern coast, etc., an anachronism. But from time to time, these broke down. You can see one here where everyone and their luggage are being unloaded. You can see Margaret far right there, as she's done on so many occasions, sitting by the road, guarding the luggage. Next row along, we all know what African roads can be like. Not terribly good if you hire just a standard saloon car. We use tuk-tuks, middle picture, a lot, and we'll be using them again in 6 weeks' time in Kenya. When Margaret's not looking, I sit on the back of a motorbike. I used to drive them. But of course, we also, for those of you who know East Africa, we use bottom row what are called matatus, which are these sort of minivans, would you call them, something like that. But they're blooming dangerous, we reckon, still. But we rather like them because they very often have their own name, their logo. And we thought there's a rather nice one here, a sort of bespoke one for one of our trips, because it says Professor on the back. But
we do have to say that now we can travel to the coast in 5 hours and in great comfort, thanks to the new Chinese train called the Madaraka Express.
So that's a bit of background, and what we've said there is absolutely genuine. However, I have to say, recent years, we, like many, including our African colleagues, have been hard hit by COVID-19. We went to Kenya and did some training in 2020. We couldn't go to East Africa at all in 2021. In 2022, I and a colleague went there, and 2023, last year, Margaret and I went together. And as I've said, we're going to be back in December this year, as if you like, as a 2024 visit. Margaret is now going to tell you a little bit of what we did last year, so you get a realistic idea of the sort of activities we do or can do.
Yes, our first port of call when we arrived was to go down to the coast on the Chinese train in 5 hours, and we went to say farewell to our beloved piece of bush, the Shamba Musa, because we had just sold it. It's sad to say goodbye. It's part of our hearts, but we're pleased that it was sold to some ardent conservationists who and just before it was sold, it was included in a fence that had been built all the way around the Mwalaganji Elephant Sanctuary. And we feel it's got a good future in the conservation, it has good conservation prospects.
And can I just add, to me, as a veterinary pathologist interested in tropical diseases, Shamba Musa was super, because it not only was beautiful, etc., 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 but it had ticks, tsetse flies and trips. That's trypanosomes, of course. I don't need to tell Africans that. What more could you ask for if you're trying to train students? Now, the second port of call, rather appropriately, on our visit last year was to the mission for seafarers. Now, if you're still awake, you're going to say, the mission to seafarers, what are the Coopers up to? Why do they go there? Well, the answer is because they have a large collection of tortoises. These are tortoises, many of them brought in by seafarers on boats and so on. And the chaplain, the Reverend Moses Mooley, you can see him on the right with a tortoise and with the Coopers, is very, very sympathetic to the fact that these are on the premises. He believes it's his duty to look after them. He calls them part of God's creation. And this, of course, is wonderful for us and our studies. And you can see pictures of studies going on at the mission and with the tortoises. And we've done these for many years. Will you say something about that one down
yes,
there?
Yeah. I get all the bottom right pictures, you see.
She's not good on left and right, so I have to tell her.
So I had to write that down.
We've only been married 55 years, so apologies if we get it wrong. Yeah.
But here we have a selection of helpers with the Tortoise Project at time. You never know who's going to come and who will be there. But in the heart of it all is Mama Perez Kimanzu. She was the manager of our property, and also she still helps with the project. She goes to visit them to check on the with the staff, with the tortoises and so on, and to bring back any news for us on how they're going at the mission.
Right, so let's move on, because I see the minutes ticking by. What I wanted to do last year, what we wanted to do, was to start a proper study on shell damage in tortoises and indeed in terrapins. We've always promoted look at dead tortoises as we are, look at live ones that are on the track, pick them up, search them for ticks, look for shell lesions, etc. And we've done our share of teaching colleagues in East Africa how to repair shells. But because of climate change, because of bushfires, tortoises are becoming important as sentinels. Look at the bottom picture there on the right from the south of France, where they have lost so many in fires in recent years. So that's the reason for the shell studies. We wanted to start them last year, and you might say, well, how do you start a shell study? Well, the first thing, of course, is that you need an Anglican vicar, an Anglican chaplain. Actually, you don't need an Anglican chaplain, and it doesn't have to be a he. You just need someone in authority who's got tortoises, and has got cooperative staff. On a more serious note, we all know that Africa is a very spiritual continent. Someone sending a message?
Yes, it's from Margaret. Keep going, no rush. People are glued to their screens.
Yeah, Margaret says this sort of thing, and then, oh gosh, wait till tomorrow when she sends us a real message. But that's kind of you, Margaret. Thanks very much. So let's try again on a more serious note.
She's been checking the pictures.
Few people in Africa do not have some religious belief or some belief but spiritual. We always respect this in our teaching and everything, and we often refer to the different faiths and the responsibilities that they foster. And it's for this reason that we would like to applaud the initiative of Share Screen Africa in developing collaboration between conservation and non-conservation students, including, we see from the programme, eco-theology and the nature of conservation in the humanities. At grassroots level, though, we encounter it every day. Look at the two text messages on the right. Mama Perez, you've been introduced to. She's saying there in Swahili, we are fine, thanks to God, everything is well. That's reassurance for her. The one below is from Jeffrey Kefar, and he was just about to go to Tsavo National Park with some baby tortoises and a Kenya Wildlife Services permit to release some of those in Tsavo National Park. And his message said, mainly English, and then he goes into Swahili, Arabic, Kesho inshallah, ya Mungu. Tomorrow, if God wills, they will be in Tsavo National Park. And indeed, they got there. So these things are important.
Have you mentioned Nicholas?
No, I haven't. Say that.
We'd like to draw attention not just to Nicholas there, who's holding a very heavy tortoise, but he's one of their daily carers who cleans and sweeps and watches after them and counts them and so on, and helps us with the project. And we'd like to thank him very much, because he's been doing this for a long time, and along with some other colleagues.
You're taking advantage of Margaret's message there. Do you want to say something about blessings and things like that?
Yes, I was going to say, apropos those two slides there with blessings, we are grateful for any blessing from any faith which helps us along in our time and our travels in Africa.
Now we're going to get back to the programme for last year, although that was part of it, of course, and Margaret will take us through it as quickly as she's able.
Yes, and us we went up north, up to Samburu County, at that time it was in a very deep drought. We had been invited by Dr. Jessica Carrere and her project and the director of her project, Dr. Shivani Bala, who has recently won the Whitley Award for her work in conservation with the Owasso Lions, and we were introduced to all the work that they're doing. And
Jessica, as you can see from her letter in 2022, had warned us about the drought, which of course we knew about. And when we got there last year, it was absolutely true. Look at the three pictures, the lower pictures here. The one in the middle, that's the famous Owasso Nyiro River. And we're just sitting in a dry riverbed having our coffee. And on the right, there were carcasses of animals, including many elephants, that had died actually in that drought. Right, well, what were we actually doing in Samburu? Well, we were joining Dr. Jessica Carrere and her colleague, the very tall chap there, as opposed to me, I'm slightly tall, Solomon Lenasalia, who is a local Samburu chap. He's now a veterinary student in Nairobi, which is marvellous. And we went out to Manyatas to see clinical cases with them. We were particularly interested to see these camels, different camels here, which had been attacked by lions. This is all part of the human-animal conflict, which we will refer to later. So that was really very, very exciting, and we've got lots of good material for our writings. I was also pleased to be able to teach some field laboratory work to Solomon, less so to Jessica, who knows a great deal. And this involved taking out a microscope. You can see a very simple microscope. Margaret will groan when she sees this. What we've taken out dozens over the years.
Yes,
well, a good number.
Special skills to get those packed in your suitcases.
Yeah, wrapped in all kinds of unmentionable garments. They work in the field because no one wants them here because they're monocular and they've got a mirror. Exactly what you want out there where you may not have electricity. And we can use them, as I was teaching there, for looking at fecal samples, blood samples, etc., from both livestock and wildlife. Right, now we want to move on to something that may appear to be a little bit different, but it underruns a lot of what we're doing. And that is the fact that we apply a forensic approach to much of our work. I do as a veterinary surgeon, a veterinary pathologist in diagnosis, and we do a great deal in our forensic investigation, and you can see a couple of books here that we've written on this subject. We use forensic in the broad sense, not just of a legal case, but meaning attention to detail, keeping records, thinking outside the box. And those, after all, are what one really needs in any sort of investigation involving wildlife. So let's have a look and see a bit more about this. Margaret's going to explain what animal forensics are.
Yes, because people often say, well, how could an animal be involved with forensics and so on? So obviously, an animal can be the victim of an injury. Look at this poor ostrich here, or what remains of it. But equally, we understand how dangerous elephants are, and also the boomslang snakes, and the damage that they can do. And also, they don't necessarily have to be actually active in it. They can provide information about an event. So here we have a dead carcass at the bottom with vultures feeding on it. Was that just wildlife interaction, or was there a crime involved as well? You may get a clue from the other species. And then they can be involved actually in investigations. Here we have a picture of a service dog, probably a sniffer dog for drugs or firearms and so on, because this was part of the security being laid on for the train we were travelling to London with, but we discovered that the Queen was also travelling to London on that train.
Must move on, whatever Margaret says. We've been on for 43 minutes. Now, if any of you are still awake, that we want to tell you very briefly that to do this sort of work, indeed, I think to do any field work, you need to be a nature detective. I, as a boy, had as a mentor Maxwell Knight, who wrote that book, top left there. He was a broadcaster, BBC, etc. He was also a very, very important spy master, in fact, in the Second World War. And he taught me, and I now teach students, we've taught our grandchildren, as you can see, top row there, that to have keep your eyes open, use your senses, explore nature and learn from it. And of course, that sort of detective work is what one's doing in Africa all the time, the bottom row here. And those of you who are still awake, and there must be one or two, may notice the bottom picture there, that there are some lion tracks, footprints going up between the tyre marks. This was a picture, one of a number we took last year in Samburu, because amongst other things, we were with our colleagues following lions and monitoring them because of the danger they present to livestock and people in the Manyattas. Now, I would love to tell you more about forensics, but the clock is ticking on. This was a fantastic case. Hippos and maggots. It smelt like heck. Maggots were pouring out of the hippo. I loved it, but I'm not going to tell you anymore. We haven't got time. If anyone's interested, you can ask us in the chat. But I would like to say, much more up to date, doing this sort of work, my forensic work, our forensic work, because we combine my being a vet with Margaret being a lawyer, is something of contrast. These pictures were taken 2 weeks ago. The one on the left, it's a dead fox, a dead red fox by the road, and I'm examining it to find out whether it was killed by a car or someone shot it and then it died, etc. Within a few hours, top right, I was looking at samples in the lab. 36 hours later, bottom right, I was in court, not as an accused, as an expert witness in Scotland, appearing as an expert witness in a case not involving these, but involving eagles and whether or not they were being kept humanely. So you must be prepared for those sort of contrasts. We have mentioned human-animal conflict, and we're not going to take you through these pictures. LCA has had many, many speakers talking about conflict. You can cast your eyes over this and realize how many instances there are, domestic, wild animals, etc., and the effect that they can have on us and indeed on the animals and on ecosystems. As a result of our interest in this, and the fact that so often information about human-animal conflict is emotional, there's hyperbole, it's the media, it's anecdotes, people exaggerate, etc., we decided some 3 or 4 years ago that we would like to write something about the science and law of human-animal conflict. We joined forces with Professor Charles Foster, who is a veterinary surgeon and a barrister, and his wife, Mary McCullins, who is a medical doctor. And this book is underway. We're working on it at the moment. And you can see Charles Foster and myself there. This picture, courtesy of our friend Janie Leakey, was taken in 2022 when we were out there, and she kindly arranged, and that's tongue-in-cheek, that a bull elephant would come and investigate us, and hence the picture. I think he sensed that we were the people writing this book and thought he might come and check us out. Yeah. Now, I'm going to hand over to Margaret, you'll all be delighted to hear, to start drawing this lecture to a close. Only 3 more slides, Margaret.
Yes. Looking back over our time, in particular Kenya, we are deeply impressed with the progress post-independence of the country. And we have to say that perhaps that progress hasn't reached everybody yet in the country, but Kenya has a thriving, well-educated core to its population, and they are pushing the country forward all the time. I think this is very well illustrated by this set of pictures from the snake park in Nairobi, which is part of the National Museums of Kenya.
Shall I quickly say,
Yes.
top left there is a photograph taken in 1970. We have many of them. There's a venomous snake there. I'm the chap crouching down with the full head of hair. I'm doing the veterinary examination. Stephen Spalls, the well-known, famous, eminent herpetologist, then at school, is looking on. And so also is a third Brit, Peter Nares, on the left there, who was the curator. And the chap who's doing the really dangerous work, holding the snake, is the chap, the Kenyan, the African down there, who's holding the snake, etc. That's how it was then, and one realised it was going to change.
But the rest of the pictures illustrate what is happening recently and now at the snake park is that the care, veterinary care and other factors are advice are provided by a team of veterinary and wildlife conservation students from the university with the help of their tutors, and they provide this service now. And at one of the leaders was Dr. Jessica Carreri, who's on the top left there. Top right, sorry, I told you.
Can I just say that that picture, and indeed the one of the snake charmers, the second picture along, are taken at the United Kenya Club, which is where we stay now in Nairobi. It was the first multiracial club in Kenya colony in 1946, long, long before most people envisaged that there might be independence. Sorry to interrupt. Yeah.
And not only do they call themselves the snake charmers, and not only do they provide the care, but they also provide for themselves and for students coming up behind them, teaching and training, so that this leaves another cohort of students to follow up as the others move on out into the working world.
Now, the next slide wasn't originally, Margaret, meant to be in there. Otherwise, we would have finished now and we would be in your good books. But we got a very nice message very, very recently from our friend, colleague, former student, Dr. Jean-Claude Massengesho, who we think is actually watching if he's not turned it off and gone to do something better. We taught him on many occasions. He sent us an email and he said, we'll move it on. There he is, top left, dressed up, very good, very impressive. But he said in his message, this recent message to us, God bless you and keep using both of you for inspiring and mentoring many more young African animal scientists and vets. Those are lovely words, and here you see him in action. It's animal welfare, mainly livestock, but he does do some wildlife work, and you can see some forensics as well. So that was why we thought we'd slip this in. We were going to have another slide, but there wasn't going to be room for that. So let's move on to our final slide. Margaret.
Yes. We'd like to thank LCA, of course, for inviting us to give this lecture, and for Margaret and Johan for your technical support and general keeping us going and help with the screen. We'd like to thank everybody in the audience, and we see some special friends of ours amongst those, and I hope we can greet some of you later, thank you for tuning in and thank you for listening. And we'd also like to thank all the people who, throughout all this that we've been doing over these years, for their support and their care and help with our teaching and training. And finally, we'd like to thank East Africa for giving us, for making us welcome and giving us lots of fun.
But don't turn off there, because as a final, that picture of us, bottom row, we had taken 2 weeks ago. We really must come clean. That's how we look now. We're 80 years old. I no longer have those flowing locks that you saw earlier. Margaret still looks pretty well the same, but isn't quite that young lady with the tawny owl. But we still have energy. We still have enthusiasm. Pliny the Elder, top right there, said, I'll put it in English, out of Africa, there's always something new. And that is what is one of the excitements to us of Africa, but also the fact that people continue to invite us to go there, to join them. When we arrive in East Africa, we get a warm welcome and inevitably are asked to do some teaching. For so long as people still want us in Africa, we are very, very happy to go there. Thank you. Asante sana.
Thank you so much. So this is the time of the evening where we would like to invite you to please make your comments, raise your hand and join the conversation. Right at the bottom of the screen, you'll find some reaction tools, and there's a hand there that you can raise, or you can just wave at us or write in the chat if you are shy. But this morning I was chatting to my colleagues in Rwanda, and we were talking about the Marburg virus. And since I had John on the screen earlier, I had to ask his opinion, and then he told me a very interesting story. So I just have to ask him to share that story with you as well. John, please talk about one of your 9 lives.
Well, first of all, can I say Marburg is of concern to all of us, and very disturbed about the current situation in Rwanda, where there have been 25 cases and deaths and so on. But it is something that will be controlled, but of course we know so little about it. The story that Johan wants me to tell you is that when I was that volunteer in Tanzania in 1967, a consignment of vervet monkeys came through Arusha airport in Tanzania. I was meant to be the vet on duty and go and check them for health. I was off duty that day. A colleague went to have a look at them and didn't actually look at them at all. He just said, how many cages? Okay, I'll sign off 30 monkeys. Those 30 monkeys then were flown to Germany, to a place called Marburg, and the deaths started, the first known deaths from Marburg virus. So I was lucky I escaped it, but nevertheless, it was sad for those people and sad for those who are affected today. But if you're worried, if you're frightened of everything, you probably won't reach the age of 80, and I intend to go on for another 20 years, not taking too many precautions. That's living adventurously is what the Quakers call it.
Wonderful. So I've seen on the screen some people that directly mentioned that they know you. I've seen Vanessa Meyer. I've seen Dr. John Steele. Jean-Claude Masengesho has been in. I think he's still in at the moment. Beatrice Bray and Carlos Hernandez, and there's people from South Africa, the UK, USA, Rwanda, and Tanzania that all acknowledge that they know you directly, and I'm sure there are many more on the screen.
We're very grateful for everybody for taking the trouble to spend this time. Even we see Norma Chapman from a colleague, an expert on deer in this country, and Dale Smith from Canada. We did some lecturing with her not so long ago. And Helen Williamson from Australia.
It costs us a fortune paying these people to attend this, and we have to pay in pounds because we're not in the European Union. But thank you very much for coming along, whether we paid you or not.
Yeah. That's right. And you say John Steele, who we met first in Tanzania, but he's followed us around to Rwanda and to the Caribbean as well, and lives just across the river in Gloucestershire from my sister.
And can we say again, Hafida Mohammed? Hafida, are you still there? I wonder if she is.
Mohammed, if you're there, please raise your hand.
Hafida?
Perhaps she's left.
No, she might have left. Well, it was very nice to see her. She was one of those students in that picture in 1966, ended up coming to Britain, and I hope she's still happy here because of all the problems on Zanzibar. One of the post-independence things that didn't work out very well initially, and it's an absolute delight to have her. And her Swahili is so good, I'm rather glad I don't have to speak to her in it.
And Carlos, thanks for keeping us on our toes when we were checking your answers to questions. You, we go to look at check because he's not.
Carlos is one of our University of Florida students.
Yes.
Carlos, ¿cómo está?
Muy bien, ¿cómo estás?
No hablo mucho español. I don't speak much Spanish. I'm better on Swahili and French.
It's okay.
nice
First
to
and
see-
foremost, I must say it's a great honor to be amongst great minds. Truly inspiring.
Well, keep questioning us.
And you're not affected by the hurricane personally, are you?
Thank goodness I'm okay. I'm located in South Florida near Fort Lauderdale, Miami.
Yes.
And the trajectory of the way of the hurricane was going to hit Florida was from Tampa.
Yes.
So I believe it was in the west of Florida.
Well, we feel quite concerned. We've been following the storm because a number of our students on that course are in the path of the storm, and we hope that they and their families are okay.
And it's nice to meet you, and
Yes.
thank you for your very nice answers. You're very logical. We've said this in messages, and we won't pester you too much at the moment because we're being kind, much kinder than I would want to be to all the UF students because of what's happening with the hurricane, regardless of whether they're affected or not.
I would like to say hi to Linda Clatterbach, lifelong friend. She, her husband was my husband's best friend at university.
In that picture in the church, Roy
Yes.
Clutterbuck
Yes, he's the best
is behind
man.
us. Yes.
Yes. And her companion Tim Roberts,
Who's taking pictures, has taken pictures for our book and keeps the human-animal conflict. And Tim keeps wondering when the book's going to come out. Just hang on for a bit longer, Tim.
and Teresa Johnson.
You should say something.
Yes, and
John
it's nice to
and
see.
Margaret.
Yes.
Now, apologies. I want to raise a question from Emmanuel Ngumbi. I don't know if you've met Emmanuel at all.
Not sure, but it's nice to meet him here now.
Okay. So, well, on your next visit to Kenya, he's in Nairobi. He's the manager at the Giraffe Center, and
right, yes.
very, very knowledgeable person on the topic of giraffes, and a very, very has a great effect as a conservation leader in Kenya, and really well worth knowing. So I would suggest next time, please go and see him. But he is asking. He's first of all saying thumbs up for their dedication to the mentorship program that aimed at building the capacity of young career African students and researchers to ensure that there will be no gap when they exit the stage. But then he's asking, my area of concern is on the training and teaching, including field research work, especially in the African continent. Interdisciplinary research has not been given prominence over the decades. I would like to hear what the Coopers have been doing to create awareness among universities or among researchers in different related fields to embrace this approach.
Well, I'll start. Margaret didn't have much time to describe our various workshops, but the ones that where she referred to the Faculty of Veterinary Medicine and so on, we do, of course, there, Emmanuel, have not only veterinary students, but wildlife students, etc. Because we're interdisciplinary ourselves, there's nothing we like better than meeting people who are not vets, who are not lawyers, or something else. And so we always do our best, and we invite people when we're drawing up invitations for workshops or discussing it with colleagues to say, let's get as many people in from different disciplines. But you're quite right. People still tend to be a bit in a box. You go to this faculty, you go to that university, and they're talking about their own discipline. We've written your name down here, and we would very much like to come and see you in December. We go past the giraffe sanctuary on our way down to Institute of Primate Research, Kipri, down in Karen. And if we may, we'll contact you, or perhaps if you sent us an email, it was on our slides, or we can put it out, or LCA could give it to you. If you send us a message, we'd love to come and see you. And you're the sort of person who could guide us, although obviously we're all the time receptive to local colleagues. So asante sana, karibu sana, labda mwezi wa December.
Thank you. And I have to say as a sideline, our house is full of giraffe, but I'm afraid they're rather static, nicely carved. But
don't tell Emmanuel that. He's looking after live ones. Ours are not dead; they're carvings. But Margaret has a thing.
Sideline.
Margaret has a thing about giraffes. I come second behind the model giraffes.
That's right, and a whole load of slides as well. But that's just a sideline. The things that we do are very small scale, very modest funding and so on, of which we always make sure that there's a decent meal in the course of the workshops. That is when people settle down and relax, and when the networking can take place, and people who know of other people in different disciplines, but don't really know how to contact them and so on. And we hope that by bringing everyone together, stirring, mixing them up and so on, particularly when they do the practical work, because they'll be put into different groups, we do hope that in particular will help with this cross-fertilization. We're not very good on big grants and things like that, but I could imagine that there must be some cross-disciplinary working, say, in the Kenya Wildlife Service, where they have a veterinary unit and they also have their wildlife people, specialists as well. And we always invite them and their legal department as well to the larger meetings that we do.
It's so nice talking to people in Africa, because the next bit is probably politically incorrect again here. But the great thing about the food at lunchtime, each lunchtime when we do our workshops, is we always include a meat dish, because meat, nyama, is an important part of African culture. And many people say, kuna chakula, there's food. Ndio, yes, there is. Kuna nyama, we say, ndio, kuna nyama. Yes, there's meat. And that is a great success. Sometimes we have to kill our own goat, which is another story in itself. But nevertheless, we try and make this inclusive in the sense, and then we mix people up. So, we go around and say, you don't think you've met the person. The course that we did on, which we haven't even mentioned here, on sea turtles. We did one 2-day one down at the coast. And the people there all sat in their little groups, Emmanuel, as if my project doesn't talk to yours, etc. And we mixed them up. We upset one Mzungu lady there by doing so, but all the others afterwards said, so nice, I met and talked to people from different projects, different backgrounds, and we exchanged information. And at our age, that's all you can really ask, that you encourage people, you catalyze what they're going to do in the future.
I think one advantage of coming from outside and doing these things at workshops as catalysts is that you don't know if you're stepping on local feet.
Toes.
Stepping on local toes and maybe upsetting someone, but hopefully opening doors and channels of communication that might not have been there beforehand.
We make lots of mistakes, despite the fact we pretend we're almost African because we have children born there, because we use Swahili, etc. But we know we make mistakes. But, we just carry on and we apologize, and people make excuses. Great thing about being old in Africa is people say, oh, they're Wazee, they're old people. So you get away with quite a lot.
You do. Yes.
Okay, I quickly want to switch to Claudia Roth, and I think she wants to ask you if you know somebody that she knows, but she might have an additional question. Claudia, over to you.
No, you're absolutely right. In the time you were in Rwanda, visiting or working with the gorillas, my friends Dieter and Edzin Stakes, they were there research.
Yes.
So you know them, I suppose.
Yes,
very,
yes.
very, very well.
Yes.
Yeah.
They were based in America at the time, but every time we had a major guerrilla meeting or of the the projects that were working there, they would come in, and yes, we met both Duta and Neptune.
We worked very closely, the veterinary centre, with the Karasoki people up in the mountains. And indeed, when we had to be evacuated because the fighting was getting so bad and we couldn't go through Kigali, the capital, because the convoys were being shot at, we actually got the people from Dian Fossey Guerrilla Fund up at Karasoki, not your friends, your colleagues, Netsin and
Dita.
Yeah, and Dita, but the others there, and we went in a convoy and through difficult roadblocks and horrible things, we all managed to get into the Congo, or Zaire as it was then. Yes, we have very happy memories of them. And if you worked with the guerrillas,
what I'm talking about, the point is I'm member of Rotary clubs, and they now do talks for our Rotary clubs. And the next talk they are doing is for the Rotary Club in Greater Cape Town. So perhaps you're interested. I could send the invite to Johan or Margaret.
Yeah, we're interested in everything pretty well, except computers. I'm not very good on computers. Yeah, I don't know, Johan, will everyone have access to our email address, which incidentally, Claudia, if we may call you that, is Ngaji, which is, of course, means gorilla in Kinyarwanda and Swahili. If Johan, we can make our email address free to anyone. Don't send us too long messages, because I type with one finger, but we would love to. Where are you based, Claudia?
I'm in Frankfurt, Germany.
Oh, the famous zoo. We've been there.
Yes, I know that.
Yeah, where the gimmicks came from.
Yeah.
Oh, you're too young to know about the gimmicks. We'll tell you sometime.
Well, I know him from, history.
From the books, yeah, it's all right. We didn't know him personally.
Well, I'm not young. I will be 60 next year, so.
No. You better move on, Johan, or I'll say the wrong thing again.
So happy to send you the email.
Yes.
Nice to speak.
Yes, we'd love to hear from you, and I expect our colleagues elsewhere will be very interested to know about your Rotary Club meeting. Yes.
Yeah, it's great. They do wonderful talks.
Good, super. Yeah, good.
Great, thank you.
Okay, Margaret has shared your email address in the chat. So anybody who want to contact you, the Coopers are very old-fashioned letter writers. They might use the technology of email, but they write beautiful letters. It's a lost art. I encourage you to write them an email.
It's worth getting the reply. It doesn't say much, but it says, "Dear Johan, dear Mr. Kruger, thank you for your etc. etc." And we end up hoping you are well. Best wishes, John and Margaret Cooper. The Americans, I bet there's some Americans listening, can't believe this, because they seem to send messages that just relate to what you do on a text. But we think letter writing is still an art.
And I'd like to add an acknowledgement for that picture where we're sitting on the Land Rover, but we haven't quite got to the top. We sent the children up higher. They're the children of Linda Clutterbuck, who's watching here, the grandchildren, and the Land Rover's in her family.
That's the two boys who can climb on the top of the Land Rover. We could, of course, but we thought it was time to show that boys can. So
thanks for her daughter, Abby.
Tim, give them all our love and best wishes. It's good to see you and know you're there, and Linda, of course.
So, John, I hope Lakshmi is still in the room at the moment. Lakshmi Natarajan, and I apologize, I'm probably pronouncing your name incorrectly, but she is saying, and I'm guessing this is a veterinarian or a zoology student. Please tell us more about the hippo and the maggots. That must be a science student.
He's hoping someone would say that.
Wonderful. Do we have another 50 minutes, or is Margaret there saying that we must make it brief? The hippo, I mean, first of all, maggots are important in their own right. But they are so important in forensic cases where you're trying to work out what happened to an animal or, of course, a human being. The hippo was in Naivasha. we were staying with our dear friend Sarah Higgins, the late Sarah Higgins, sad to relate, who's the lady with the eagle owl in the bird of prey picture. And one of her staff came running in the next morning, and he said he'd smelt something, and there was a dead animal.
We smelt it at supper.
Yeah, we smelt it also at supper, but we thought, never mind, we like smells. And we went out to find it. It was actually a young hippo that appeared to have fallen into a trench where there'd been some digging. This is right out on a farm, a small farm, so it wasn't cultivated area. But obviously had been there some time. But of course, post-mortem change is accelerated at high temperatures, and it was hot at that stage. And so we had a look at it, investigated it. A good example of where I just had to deal with what I could. Margaret, as always, was producing plastic bags for samples and so on. And Sarah's staff was superb, considering the stench. And it transpired, you might have seen that in the pictures, that it had some wounds on its flank. Some people would call them lacerations, but they were more like incisions. They were like a cut, and almost certainly had been caused by a tooth of a hippo. And we put 2 and 2 together. I can't remember all the details now because it was about 6 or 7 years ago. And we assumed at the time that it had probably been attacked by another hippo, or at least pushed around by another hippo, got these wounds, and then fallen into the trench. The maggots were important because if you get maggots, you don't preserve them all. You preserve some so that you know what stage instar they're at, but the other ones you have to metamorphose so that they become flies. They might turn into a Lucilia fly or a Califera or something, because you need to know the species, you need to know what instar they were, and if you've got some idea of the temperature, you can work out how long it was since the fly eggs had been laid. That's a sort of basic forensic entomology. But it is fun. I joke about the smells and the maggots, mainly because I get the interesting cases, because most other people scarper, sorry, that's London or run away, disappear when there's a smelly hippo. So it's so nice to have a questioner who was interested in that case. If she is here, perhaps she'd like to reply. Does she share my enthusiasm, or does she think I've gone totally gaga?
Thank you very much. I found your entire presentation fascinating, and I was definitely interested in the baby hippo and the maggots. And it's like proper crime scene investigation stuff. So really fascinating.
So where are you based, like Dr. Lakshmi?
I am based in, I'm not a veterinary doctor. I work at the Zurich Zoo.
Oh, much more interesting. Veterinary doctors are everywhere. They're like tsetse flies. They're like Quelea. That's much more interesting. So I'm
like a volunteer keeper, and I've worked with penguins for about 13 years.
It sounds lovely. That's great fun. This is all part of the spectrum of wildlife conservation, the environment, the things that LCA and Share Screen are doing so well to make it a holistic subject. That's great.
Exactly. And I must commend Johan on the perfect pronunciation of my name as well. So.
Oh, that's Johan. Well, I'm glad you've said something good. You've said something good about him. I spent most of my time grumbling. Yeah.
So my husband and I were in Kenya for a whole month last year. So just visiting national parks, not living there like you. And we found it an absolutely fascinating country, and we've fallen in love with East Africa. So that was my motivation to join today. And you've done nothing but increase, I think, my love and fascination for that part of the world. So thank you for that.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Sharon. Could we possibly, Johan, say hello to Simon Sayer? Margaret will tell you who Simon Sayer is. He's a proper Kenyan. He's born and bred there, not pseudo like us. Will you say who Simon is, and Simon, particularly his father?
Simon, we want to say personally, as we have in emails, we're sorry for the loss of your father recently. He was a very good neighbour to us, a good colleague, a friend, very skilled veterinary surgeon in terms of surgery, and well known throughout Kenya for his work with wildlife as well as with domestic species.
Yes.
And we're thinking of you and your family, and we look forward to coming to see you and to attend the memorial service.
Absolutely.
We'll do in December.
anything we can do to help, let us know. We feel we represent when you were our neighbours back in the 70s and subsequently. Yeah. Oh,
Margaret, John, thank you very much. It's very kind of you.
Yeah. Well,
We're
all the
all here
best.
together, actually.
oh gosh. We didn't know whether to, we felt embarrassed telling proper East Africans about what we've done, because it's a drop in the ocean compared with your living there, the day-to-day ups and downs, which Margaret alluded to. And of course, we've lived in other countries, lived in the West Indies, which can be very difficult, as well as Africa. So do forgive us. Some of you were probably wincing and saying, oh, this sentimental John Cooper, British slush, you know, etc. But it's how we are. When you get to the age of 80, you just present yourselves as you are, even if you pretend you're African chameleons. But it's lovely, and best wishes to all the family, and we're much looking forward to seeing you, sharing the grief, but also sharing the happiness of your father and his wife and Olwyn, all the wonderful things that we've done together in the past.
Yes.
Thank you. What you do is phenomenal. I have no more words.
Well, your father used to tell some funny stories about what happened in our gardens when he was the very sober, upright citizen next door.
Your father was wined and dined when he went to Scotland, because he told stories about his eccentric neighbours. That's Margaret Cooper, who is a bit eccentric, and me, and I'm not eccentric at all. I exaggerate slightly.
No, John, you're absolutely right.
But really, it's wonderful.
I'll leave you to carry on.
Yes, thank you.
Okay, see you soon.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Simon, thank you for joining, and respect to your father. I've got a question, and once again, apologies for attempting to pronounce the name. Panache Mundandishe said, and this is a beautiful tribute to you. Thank you so much. I now have a different approach to my veterinary career. So there's
lovely.
There's a new insight that happened in this conversation, and that's what we always hope for during these events, is that somebody will have an aha moment and there will be a little shift of perspective. That we call that a win.
Yes, and I think that that is an echo of what Bwana Emmanuel from the Giraffe Centre was saying about disciplines. It's so easy for people to train in veterinary medicine, human medicine, law, entomology, whatever it is, and only deal with their own subject. And veterinary medicine has such potential. It's a sort of it can be a holistic subject, or you can just spend all day, every day, castrating dogs and spaying cats and so on, which seems to me a little bit sad. And the great thing to us about your LCA presentations is that you bring together not just people from different places, but also the idea we're all in this together. This planet is threatened like nothing else, and we've all got to work together, not say, oh, I'm in this compartment, you're in another. The compartments are not important. It's what we can offer.
And if you can get different disciplines, for example, the veterinary profession and the wildlife conservationists, with their different aspects and knowledge about particularly the same species, then it is all for benefit of that species. And it gets over what has happened so often in the past, that there's been absolute animosity between the scientists and the veterinarians. Whereas if they get together, it can be exciting for both of them, both disciplines.
That's why I'm married to a lawyer, because she can actually intervene and say, you're right and you're wrong. She says I'm wrong every day, so I'm used to it.
Oh.
No. Johan laughed, fortunately.
Yeah, silly.
That was a joke.
Yes, don't say anything.
Yeah,
So,
could you take...
John, go for it.
Margaret just wanted to welcome one of our another long-term friend.
Yes, our friend Norma Chapman, I mentioned her at the beginning. She's a very good friend, again, a lifetime friend since we were at university, and John was organising an animal welfare group there, and Norman was working in the headquarters. She sent us endless literature and encouragement and letters, and she's remained our friend, I don't know for how many years now.
She actually remembers Margaret Vowles as in that picture, and I often call her Norma Armstrong because she was at the time. Do you want to say anything, Norma, or are you hiding away there?
as a deer expert on many species of deer. No,
She's probably very sensibly gone and put the kettle on.
yes. Oh, well, anyway, Norma, if you watch this again, we send you our very best wishes and hope to come and see you when we next go past you on our way to Cambridge University.
There are various comments coming in on we think on the chat. I daren't touch that; it will probably all explode. Will we?
John, can I quickly ask a question from two technical questions?
Yes.
One from Emmanuel that I missed earlier that Margaret sent on to me. Being long experienced vets, I have noted two interested trends with the giraffe sex ratios in two Rothschild's giraffes conservation areas, with almost 50-50 and having more males being recruited to the population. What could be the reason behind more males being born or recruited to the population? Any ideas on that?
That's a pretty technical question.
Yes, it is.
I hope Norma's listening now, because she and her late husband knew so much about ruminants, etc. I don't have an immediate answer. I've got to the stage where, and Margaret advises this: don't speak immediately, don't answer immediately, think about it. I think I don't know the answer, but I'd like to consider this, reflect on this, and stay in touch with us.
There was something in when we were in the Samburu about improving the pasture. Was there anything that selected what species came?
Well, it might be species, but I don't think it would have a selection pressure on the gender. You know, if it was domestic livestock, you'd wonder about semen quality and all these sort of things. I really don't know the answer, but that's what's so exciting. It is a challenge. I think, could I make a note, which I'll do here? And if you'd like to stay in touch, I understand you've got our email. We'll get back, and if we have any ideas or meet anyone at Cambridge University this weekend who might be better informed than we are.
Or is there anyone listening who has giraffe populations in their interest?
Yeah, if anybody in the room knows the answer, please, now's the time to raise your hand. I would also, Emmanuel, if you don't mind, I'm also going to share your telephone number with John and Margaret. And then when you're in Nairobi, ring him up and go and discuss it at the Giraffe Centre.
Certainly.
That would be really super. Could we also welcome Professor Arthur Kamoli? Hello, Arthur. He was played a very important part in our. He's a professor of paediatric dentistry at the University of Nairobi. A good example of cross-disciplinary one. It's very nice to see your name, Arthur. Are you willing to say hello, or are you busy doing something else?
Hello, John and Margaret.
Hello,
and
Professor.
the rest of the group. It's a pleasure listening. I joined rather late, but I think it has been enjoyable.
You're welcome, whatever time you join, and I hope we will see you soon when we come to Kenya in December.
Yes, our best wishes to Sarah and the family. We'll see you at the United Kenya Club, and we'll have a Tusker beer or something together, if that's okay, if we're allowed to mention Tusker beer on this webinar.
And thank you for collaboration with the project, of course.
Yeah, super. Thank you.
Interesting.
Thank you very much. They are here, they are listening. So I think they've heard. Yeah.
Oh, well, greetings to them, of course.
To seeing you in December then.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yes.
We are as well. Yeah, indeed. Thank you.
Please warn them at the club.
Yeah. Well, the club know we're coming, but the club may have changed by the time we've got there. It seems to be moving. This is the United Kenya Club. It seems to be moving forward, or possibly sideways in very quickly. But we'll chat to you about that when we see you.
Yeah, that's right. Okay.
Does Jean-Claude?
John, I want.
Carry on.
Yeah.
John, can I jump in with another question from my colleague, Dr. Kirsten Neki, and it's maybe your children that's asking this question, and I have confidence that you will be able to answer this one. I'd love to know about your fixing up of tortoise shells. Do you just Prattley Putty them. Now, Prattley Putty, it's, I don't know if you know what that is.
Yeah.
She says, well, not sure of the English version of Prattley Putty. Well, that's what you use to fix windows in South Africa, or pretty much anything that's broken.
Well, yeah, Margaret can tell you, we didn't have time to say that one of our pictures was how we had to repair tortoise shells in Tanzania, which has always been a much poorer country and certainly was then. And you can explain about the carve.
Yes, we didn't have any access to the materials that might be used by veterinarians in the West and so on. But at the time, some of our neighbours were an expatriate family that were training the workmen, the mechanics in the Church of England, what would you call car garage. The idea was that the church is the Anglican Church frequently given donations of vehicles, but they tended to pile up in the back of the church premises and not get repaired. And it was a project to train people to care for the repair the cars, keep them going, run them properly, and also to make money. They would accept people who were living around who would like their car to be repaired. So this built up quite a good rapport, and this rather black.
Yeah, the picture bottom left is of Hingeback tortoise, rather faded picture. One of the first that we repaired with car body filler. But the picture on the right in Kenya, much more recently, with Dr. John Kimani there, veterinary colleague, is using proper dental plaster, which works very well. But we must point out that if a tortoise is still growing, and most of them are, you can't keep the same dental plaster or whatever it is on there all the time, because otherwise they'll get contortions in the shell. So you need to use it with care, monitor the tortoises, and then when it's obvious that it needs to be removed or slightly removed to allow for growth, to do so. It's patching them up, of course, but they're necessary. Some of the injuries are horrific, not just what you see on the left, two up there. That's minor, but nevertheless, that was a sort of welfare thing. In the longer term, as we were saying, we're more concerned that so many tortoises die in bushfires in Europe and elsewhere, and they may well be important indicators of where there has been burning that perhaps hasn't been detected. It's almost certainly climate change again.
While we've got that screen up, the picture above with the gentleman holding the tortoise skeleton there is a veterinarian from India who came to do some studies at the snake park in Nairobi, and it was he who started the snake charmers group and taught them how to handle the snakes and how to care for them and how to treat them initially. And then they brought in their own veterinary staff and so on. So we have to attribute to him the origin of the snake charmers, but it's a brilliant concept.
Is it?
So I see that. Apologies, John, you were saying something?
I just wondered if Jean-Claude Massengesho, who's still on, would like to say hello, because we've read out his letter and we admire him greatly. Jean-Claude, are you able to say something to us in English, Kinyarwanda, French, Swahili? You're so fluent now.
Hello.
How are you?
Yeah, I'm good. Thank you. I had the technical issues. Apologize.
That's
Greetings
okay.
from Rwanda, Coopers, Mama Margaret, and the Professor Cooper. Yeah, it's amazing to see you after we met before COVID.
Yes.
But basically, I really want to appreciate all you have done for me. I met you 2017, I remember, and you were a big team, and I thought animal welfare, it's a good subject. And from that time, among my colleagues, I really took it as a special interest. I know Cooper helped me to go to attend workshop to Tanzania. They told my former boss, your employees is keen for animal welfare. They send me the document. They helped me to be even in touch with professors from Cambridge University, like Professor Peter.
Peter Fordyce, yes, who we hope to see.
We should see him this weekend.
He's a great supporter of yours. He's most impressed by what you're doing. And I think he likes it because animal welfare permeates through all aspects of animals, as does conservation. It doesn't matter whether you're looking at cattle or you're looking at wildebeest. Concern over the individual animal is important, as well as the conservation side of the species or the group. Yeah,
I'm amazed at how much you've made your interest grow throughout Rwanda and East Africa in the time since we had that seminar, and you said that you were interested in animal welfare.
Yeah. And we're very impressed you wear this dark suit, and you look like a diplomat, and you are an ambassador, but we know not a political ambassador.
And yet you're down on the ground dealing with the animals when you go out in the field.
And so I really want to appreciate all mentorship and support and all you did for Rwanda scientists and for animals. And we wish you came back and we host you. Thank you very much.
We saw your message in the chat. Thank you. I must tell you, and this is a little bit of a joke, I wanted you to go to Tanzania so that you'd learn proper Swahili. So I hope your Swahili is better next time we see you.
Kidogo, asante.
Unasema vizuri. Asante sana.
Asante sana.
Yeah.
So John, thank you, Jean-Claude. To draw the evening to an end, there's a question from Max. And I can see that the students are now starting to wake up now that it's getting late. He says, good evening, Mr. and Mrs. Margaret, Mr. John and Mrs. Margaret. As a natural resource management student here in Namibia, I would like to ask you if you ever came across animals that suffered from capture myopathy and how you dealt with it to help those animals.
Yes, thank you very much, Bwana Max. Lovely to hear from Namibia. We've never been there, but but being old Brits, we know the history of that country. You're very welcome. Yes, I encountered it quite a lot in the early days in Tanzania and in Kenya, because in those days export of wildlife was very, very popular and allowed by East African governments, and many of the animals were chased by vehicle or some other way. I mean, even the flamingos on the Rift Valley lakes were chased by little speedboats to catch them. And then a proportion of the mammals and the birds that were caught, I had to go out as a veterinary officer to inspect them, couldn't stand up, or they showed other clinical signs, and some got better and some didn't. But of course, in those days, we didn't understand the physiology really of capture myopathy. We assumed they got damaged in the chase. We didn't understand about the electrolyte imbalance, acidosis, and so on. And of course, the whole subject has advanced far more than I knew then. The answer is yes, I've seen it. I've seen it on many occasions. We didn't even call it that in the early days. But as it became much more obvious, and I take my hat off to you people in Southern Africa, because so much of the work on capture myopathy was done in the Southern African countries. Can you answer the question as well? Have you seen it? Are you interested in it professionally?
Yes, we have. Good evening, everybody, once again. We have dealt with it, or it was actually a topic that we did with our lecturers during our lecture lessons. And I was just wanted to look more into it and to understand the whole concept and how to help those animals when they undergo that. As here in Namibia, sometimes we go for field excursions to various game parks within Namibia and experience more and about how those animals, how people within the parks undergo to treat those animals that undergo capture myopathy, and sometimes also the ones that are transported to various countries and when they set up those whole capture capture methods like the bombers and the different
Yes.
capture methods they use to capture the animals. So I just wanted to more to have more knowledge on how they deal with it, because when they capture those animals, actually they are always at high risk of capture myopathy, since sometimes they use helicopters
Yes.
to direct them into bombers.
Yes, and I remember I went to the Kruger National Park in South Africa many years ago when they were culling elephants using helicopters and on foot or by a four-wheel drive vehicle. And one of the concerns there was not to chase the animals, not to exert them too much, to keep them cool, etc., for various reasons, which you'll understand. But one of those was the fear of capture myopathy. It's a very good thing you've raised this, Dr. Max. Are you doctor or Bwana or what?
No, no, not yet. I'm a first year here in Namibia at the
Oh, that's
University of
okay.
Science and
Oh, well,
Technology.
yeah,
On the way.
we like young people. We mix it with too many old ones here in Britain. But we'll call you Bwana Max then. We're glad you it, uh, introduced this topic because it comes back to our discussion with Jean-Claude that animal welfare is important, because if conservationists are going to maintain a good reputation with animal welfareists, and this country, Britain, is so strong in animal welfare issues. I mean, it's good. We care about people and their welfare generally, and we do about animals. But I think anything that is done to wild animals that causes distress, even though the media, as I said earlier, often exaggerate these things, we ought to be looking at. We should show that our conservation methods, our management methods, whether it's immobilizing animals, catching them by hand, putting rings on birds, whatever, we should be seen to have a code of ethics and to be aware that animal welfare is a responsibility of all those working with animals. I'm sorry to sound like a preacher. I should also say, Bwana Max, that there's some very interesting work in domesticated animals, particularly the endurance racing that we have here in Europe, where horses go on long rides, and they don't suffer capture myopathy as such, but they undergo physiological changes because of the long-term exercise they're getting. And it would be a wonderful opportunity for someone in your sort of position to join forces with people who are working with domesticated animals, because the physiological changes are probably more easily studied in domesticated animals initially. Thank you for raising a very good question.
I'll be glad to join those participants also, some of them that deal with domestic animals, because
Yeah.
currently the course I'm doing, it's mainly just focused on wild animals.
Yes. Well, I think, an animal is an animal is an animal, and indeed humans are part of
Yeah.
that as well. We have to think in a broad way, as LCA does, and that, the earth, the environment, the world is what we're dealing with, not just our own little speciality. Good luck in your studies, and we
Thank
may
you
see
very
you
much.
sometime. If you come to Britain, send us a message, and we'll invite you over. We'll
All
invite you
right.
over for tea and cake.
Thank you.
English tea.
Thank you very
English
much.
tea, yeah. Thank you.
Max, thank you so much for excellent question. It is also really fascinating to see how the Coopers deal with the big picture, but also with the detail. And I think that comes with experience. So if there aren't any further questions or people that would like to say hi to the Coopers or the Coopers hi to them, I think we are going to draw the evening to a close, because we've been busy for about 2 hours now since we've opened the doors. So that was great fun. The last few sessions of Unlocking Nature, we dealt with some pretty serious panel discussions, and then tonight was just a lovely storytelling networking session with a lot of lessons learned in between. So it was great fun. Thank you so much to the Coopers.
Thank you.
Thank you, thank you.
And we are still worried as to what Margaret will say in her first email tomorrow, which of course arrives before we've actually got up. but we could have finished in the 45 minutes. We almost made 49 minutes, but she sent this little message saying, don't worry.
Keep going.
She said, keep going. And we have. Our apologies to those who had to leave or got fed up, but we do appreciate it. And we do repeat our thanks to Margaret. I only pull her leg joke because she is so nice, so helpful, and so understanding, particularly of old chaps like me.
And sorry to any of our friends that we didn't greet directly, but it was wonderful. As the screen came up and your faces came on, it was amazing.
So
Thank you very much.
We'll say kwaheri, au revoir, auf Wiedersehen, totsins, whatever is your appropriate language. And when you're ready, we'll turn off, but we must stay here until you tell us to.
Well, I would like to say, anybody who would like to be connected to the Coopers that haven't been connected, we've already swapped telephone numbers between the Coopers and Emmanuel. So Margaret was very quick in doing that. So that's already done. So anybody else who would like to connect to them and benefit from their experience and expertise, you're welcome to contact us and we will pass their details on to you. It's been a great networking session. Thank you so much, everybody. Sleep well.